Alright guys, today I want to give you a little insight on how us guys at the Hunter's Advantage kiss.
What do you mean by that?
Wait, now this is a different kind of kiss, but if one of them was to pull a 180 off of public, I'd probably kiss him on the mouth. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is everybody's heard of the analogy KISS, which stands for keep it simple, stupid. And in an era of flashy, overcomplicated hunting strategies, it can get kind of overwhelming, especially if you're new into hunting. So today we're going to try to apply this analogy to every part of hunting, because I'm a firm believer that someone that's super good at the basics can out-hunt a person who knows some sort of flashy hunting technique that someone could realistically only use probably 1% of the time. So be sure to like this video and be sure to share it with your buddies so you too can kiss while hunting. Let's get into it. Also, I just want to point out before we get started that this is just how we do things. I'm not saying any other way is wrong. If it works for you, great. There's more than one way to skin a cat, and also the same applies for deer. In our method of scouting, we use e-scouting and boots on the ground scouting interchangeably in a method we call the funnel method. And simply put, think of this whole scouting portion as a funnel. It starts large and it gets smaller and smaller. So to start, we will e-scout and then put boots on the ground scouting and hang cameras in spots where we probably won't hunt during the season. It sounds a little weird, but I'll explain. Before we dive right into the interesting stuff like killing big giant bucks, first we got to know where to find them. And to do that, we got to start from scratch by e-scouting. And right off the bat, I'm going to hit you with the most important takeaway from the way we e-scout, which is do not get specific. This is to find an area, not a tree. Now, this is just a random piece of public because I will not be giving out any of our spots. So if you hunt here, then I am sorry. So what we would do is we would start by looking for a place where we can just cast a wide net. And this is just an area where you can scatter a few cameras wherever you think you're going to get the most deer activity. And the cool thing about this is human pressure will be down, so bigger bucks will use these areas more during the summer. So in this example, we have this main road, and a little bit further down we have what looks like an old 2-track that probably the biologist made. And all we would do is hang cameras every 200 yards or so to help paint the best possible picture for what's in that area. And at this point, we're not trying to form any patterns on deer. We're just simply trying to see what all exists in this area. Then we would just give it about 3 to 5 weeks and then analyze the intel and redistribute. All this means is you would leave the cameras that produced and relocate the ones that didn't. So in this example, we have this county road still and then this old 2-track. Let's say we set out 4 cameras on this 2-track, and then we had another area over here that we set out that kind of looks similar, but they didn't really produce. Well, when we waited that 4 to 5 weeks and checked it, what we would do is we would gather these cameras because they just didn't produce, and we would simply bring them over here, leave these ones, and then maybe set them out right here, maybe set them out right here if it looks deery. Right now, the bucks are probably bachelored up, and we're just trying to find different areas where we think we could get them just to get more intel. So just kind of paint a picture for y'all. What we just did is we casted a wide net. We found a group of bucks in an area that we kind of want to focus on, and so we took the cameras that didn't produce and reallocated them to this area. So we cast a wide net, top of the funnel, and right now it's just getting ever so slightly smaller because we've honed in on a certain area. Because if this is something you're just starting to get into, you might be wondering, why do I need to relocate all the cameras? Why can't I just sit over this road where I got a lot of good bachelor pics of bucks walking through that area? You know, I get they might distribute after the testosterone hits, but the thing is, if there's 5 big bucks in this group, surely one of them will stick around, right? But next month during the camera pool, you'll kind of understand why this idea will be short-lived. So at this point, it's September, and at least for here in Oklahoma, you have that October 1st opener. So the deer that were on your cameras hitting it nonstop during the early summer, they're probably not going to be using it that much just due to the human pressure. The closer the season gets, the more human pressure gets put on there. It's okay. They didn't vanish off the face of the earth. You're just not going to have pictures on those easy access routes anymore because more than likely us humans, we're pretty lazy. That's where we're going to walk to get to point A to point B for the most part. The deer are going to stop doing that. You might get a few nocturnal pics, which is all cool, but you also got to run the risk of maybe getting a camera stolen. From our experiences, they just went back either a mile or 2, or where we hunt, it would be like a ridge or 2, just to get away from that pressure. And this is the perfect example why it's better to start early than late, because at this point it's late. They're just now throwing out their first set of cameras in September, probably to come out and check them when they hunt in October. And they will likely have less pictures to work with and have a smaller picture of what's actually in the area. So at this point, you should feel like you've really narrowed down on a spot where one of your hit lister bucks are going to be using. And just to emphasize this a little bit, on this one in September, be sure to redistribute the cameras to where you actually think you're going to sling an arrow at a deer. More than likely, the next time you're going to be able to get up there and check cameras will most likely be in October while you're hunting. And again, we're in Oklahoma, so our season starts October 1st. If you're in a place like Kansas where your season opens a little bit earlier in September and you're wanting to implement this strategy, just kind of adjust your timeline accordingly. So you might want to start maybe a month earlier. So now that we kind of understand how the funnel of scouting works, let's dig into where to relocate the cameras after you locate a big hit lister buck on one of these abandoned roads or two tracks. If you listen to enough podcasts or watch enough videos, it can be almost information overload whenever you try to identify certain types of topography. While being able to read a topo map is important to know, first, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Because even if you can read a map, that one drainage or draw might not be in the best area. I know every situation is different, but from our own experiences hunting the more mountainous parts, it can just be nothing but miles upon miles of hills, pines, and more hills. So in our scenario, there could be a few different drainages where one could hunt. So which one would be the best to start scouting? Well, the answer we came up with is the one that has the most diversity around it. And this is where we include the phrase X marks the spot. This is a phrase I heard from Parker McDonald from Southern Ground Hunting, and it just made so much sense to me. And to put it in a super simple sentence, that's a pretty good tongue twister. Look for a place where different types of habitat or terrain meet. Because the more diversity you have in one spot, the better the odds the deer will probably be using that area. So as we all know, deer are creatures of edge habitat. So what we want to do, X marks the spot, is fill each corner of the X with a different piece of diversity. For example, I'm pretty big on hunting near water, so that checks off one corner of the X. And since where I primarily hunt is nothing but pines, oaks, and hills, I would follow a creek and look for a spot where maybe there is an oak flat within the pines. And let's just say not too far away there is an old clear cut that now has head-high grass. So with the water, pines, oaks, and the tall grass field, you now have all corners of your X filled with a lot of diversity in one area. And from there, just put boots on the ground and look for sign or anything that looks deery within that X, and then slap a camera or two there. So that's where I'd first start looking for that hit lister buck you got on camera in the beginning of the summer, either on the old two track or the old road or crossing. And if you find them there in that first spot, great. Now just start throwing cameras around there to try to get him more and more consistently. If not, that's okay. What I would do is I would label those X spots that you get in those areas to most diverse to least diverse, and then I would just go through, look at each spot, and check them off as you go. I already know there's going to be people that say you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket, meaning you shouldn't put all your efforts and resources into hunting that one specific target buck. But what we've kind of realized after a few seasons of doing it this way is that even if you want to chase and you want to harvest that target buck that you got on camera, more than likely throughout this process you'll stumble upon one. It might be a little smaller, but you'd be more than happy to take home with you just by trying to find this deer, if that makes sense. So to summarize the scouting portion, for e-scouting, the biggest takeaway would be do not get specific. This is to find an area, not a tree. And remember, after you get the pictures of your target buck on one of those old abandoned roads or two tracks, to try to figure out where to hang the camera and find that big buck, just remember X marks the spot where you want to fill each corner of that X with some piece of diversity. For the boots on the ground portion of the scouting, just remember the funnel method. Cast a broad net, and then each time you're narrowing down on that buck or the group of bucks, you're getting smaller and smaller and smaller on where he's using more consistently. Besides scouting and hanging cameras, there's still things that need to be done, even if you don't want to. Now listen, I'll be the first to say that burnout is a real thing, and if I'm being honest, if it's a February, and unless I've had just a season of seasons, I'm honestly kind of glad that hunting season's over. Because from the beginning of October to the middle of January, I'm always trying to be out in the woods, and if I can't, then I'm thinking about it, trying to play cat and mouse with this certain buck, being away from home, and then just sooner or later, it just drains you. So with that being said, I don't think it's that bad of an idea to take just a slight break. But the older I get, it seems like time starts going faster and faster, and one day it's a nice April morning, and then the next you're halfway through August, and then you realize you haven't shot your bow once. And then when you go in the closet, reach for your bow, you forgot that you lost 4 arrows last year, and so now you only have 2 left, and one of them probably has a broken tip. So by the time you get online, you reorder your Exodus MMT arrows, it's already September, and you got about 2 weeks before the season opener to relearn your shooting form, which might be enough time. And the same kind of applies for stand prep. I know most of the public guys don't have to worry about that because you can't do much altering on public pieces, but for the private guys, just be sure either put notes in your phone where you won't forget those limbs and branches and stuff that keep getting in your shooting lane. So to sum up the preparation, a little break is fine, but just don't let it get out of hand. So gear is something a lot of people can make way too complicated. In a time where we are extremely over marketed and it seems like people want to shove more and more product in your face, saying if you buy X product, it'll help you kill more big giant bucks. When in reality, that's just not true. You really don't need that much to be successful in the woods, and thank God, because if you haven't seen the price of things lately, crap's pretty expensive right now. So to keep it simple, just get the necessities and then gradually build up your arsenal from there. Especially if you're just starting out, I wouldn't buy the new flagship bow or get a whole closet of Sitka, because all that's going to do is just drain your bank account, and especially if you don't stick with it, now you just have all this great stuff that you never used. And if you're listening and that's you, DM me, because I like to buy stuff for cheap. So just start small, learn the ropes, and then just build your way up from there. So my own personal example of this, up until 2021, I was using my old Matthews switchback, and in 2020, I shot the biggest buck of my life on public land using this same switchback and some like Walmart arrows, and God, I don't even know what broadheads I was using. Just to put a little bit into perspective, the switchback came out in 2006. I shot that buck in 2020. So with that being said, this bow is 14 years old and it did the job just fine. So old is fine as long as it works well and it puts the animal down ethically. And the same goes for backpacks, tree stands, clothing. And going back to 2020, I shot that buck out of an old climber that was just a hand-me-down from a family friend that I got years ago. The only thing I would say about that is make sure everything's sound on it, because the cost of a new tree stand or a new saddle would probably be less expensive than a doctor's bill. And if you are looking to upgrade or replace some of your old equipment like saddle platforms, tree stands, climbing sticks, camera arms, anything of that nature, I would strongly recommend you check out on a Limb Manufacturing. If you want to save a little bit of money while you do so, be sure you use code HNTA10 for 10% off at checkout. As for other gear like trail cameras, you can definitely buy those used, especially if you're hunting like public land or something where there's a good chance of them getting lost, broken, or stolen. So with that in mind, we have acquired most of ours from Facebook Marketplace, where some cameras are like 40 or 50 bucks for some pretty decent budget cameras. You can find the same ones, if not better brands, for cheaper on Marketplace. It's June right now, and we just got done setting out the majority of our trail cameras out on public, and I think we got like 23 or 24, not including our cell cams. I'm not very good at math, but I think that's almost $1,000 worth of cameras, and I think we at most probably have $600 in them. So on private, it's a little bit different story than on public because we splurge a little. We run cell cams, which would be the Exodus Outdoor Gear Rivals. What I kind of like about them is they have a 5-year no BS warranty. A lot of my private is on flood ground, so if it rains a lot and in a hurry, more than likely the camera's going to end up underwater, so we're just going to test that. We might be testing the warranty out here pretty soon. And if you want to save a little bit of money as well for the Exodus outdoor trail cameras, the MMT arrows, or basically anything else they got on their website, be sure you use code HA15 for 15% off on their website. One little bonus tidbit that I wanted to mention before we get into actually the hunt and what we think about the hunt and stuff like that would be the baiting topic. To bait or not to bait. Apparently in some parts of the hunting community, I guess it isn't cool to hunt over corn or bait or anything else along those lines. And I guess the cool thing now is to sit 40 feet up in a tree using a saddle and the one stick method, hunting with a trad bow and homemade wooden arrows that you fletch with blue jay feathers. And if you don't do that, then you might as well be using a crossbow. Well, I'm going to give you my opinion, which does not mean much. Shoot what you want. Hunt how you think is fun, as long as it's legal. And don't let people get inside your head where you don't want to use corn anymore or any type of bait. Because if you want to give them someone to hate on, you can send them to us, because we shoot a lot of deer over corn and other bait. just to set the scene a little bit, summertime's finally over. You're starting to feel that nice, crisp, cool breeze blowing through. You got your list of hit lister bucks. But before you go stomping out there all willy-nilly, there are some things that you need to consider. Number one of those, in order, would be to play the wind. Now, there are some things about deer that you can trick. Sometimes their eyes, sometimes their ears, but you cannot trick the nose. So for the folks just starting out, always hunt a stand where the wind is in your favor. This isn't just limited to where your stand is either. You have to take into consideration your access routes. Now, I know there's a lot of other things to consider besides just playing the wind, but I feel like this is the most important, because if you don't play the wind and it blows right where you expect the deer to come from, your hunt's kind of already over before it began. This would at least give the new hunters the opportunity to have that encounter. Now, this is something that can be summed up in just a few sentences. Shoot what makes you happy, and never pass your biggest deer. Something I struggle with is getting a picture of a big buck in the summer and then falling in love with that deer. And I kind of feel like I'm not alone in this. If you're the type of guy that only chases his #1 hit lister and that's the only deer you're going to shoot or else you'll eat tag soup, then my hat's off to you. On private, I'm in the same exact boat. That's typically how I like to do things, is I have my target buck. I might have a second one, but for the most part, it's either that or I'm not going to fill a tag on private land at all. Now, public, on the other hand, that's a little different story. Even though we try to scout and find the biggest deer we can on public, we're not really holding that to as high of a priority, I would say, as we do on our private pieces. Mainly because whether people want to believe it or not, patterning a big buck on public is a little bit harder than patterning one on private. Mainly just due to the human pressure. There's a lot of unforeseen circumstances that could occur. You got a lot more people probably going in and out of that public rather than the private, I guess, depending on who you share a lease with. So how we gauge what we want to shoot on public would be something we call the oh damn factor. So if a buck comes strolling through and it doesn't automatically make you go damn, and your bow doesn't just magically levitate into your hand, then it's probably not a deer you should shoot. Because I've learned the hard way, those bucks you got to kind of think about shooting. You know, do I really want to shoot that buck or not? Those are the ones that typically have the most ground shrinkage. And again, I'm not telling anybody what they should or shouldn't shoot. This is just how we do things. So once that deer walks in that makes you say, oh damn, for the new guys, there's a few things I would recommend you do. The most important thing would be to read the room. Is it a big buck chasing a doe in the middle of the rut where you got to move quick and throw out the old-fashioned Is it a buck just slowly browsing through with no worry in the world? Or maybe it's a doe that is super skittish and it looks like it has a bad case of schizophrenia, where if you even blink, she's going to take off and let every deer in the county know where you're at. The thing about reading the room is you kind of learn it by doing it, if that makes sense. It's going to take you a few times of getting it wrong, getting blown out and busted before you kind of learn how to do it right. And even when you do figure it out, you're still going to get it wrong half the time, or at least that's how it was for me, which, believe it or not, is okay. You could have a few years where you feel like nothing could go wrong. If you even look at a deer, it's probably going to drop dead in its tracks. And there could be years where you just eat tag soup and there's really nothing you can do about it no matter how hard you try. But hey, that's why the high is so great whenever you're able to actually connect and seal the deal. Finally, the last basic thing I would tell any beginner to do is just to make sure it's an ethical one. Now, I get stuff happens and emotions get the best of us, because I'm guilty of it too, but there's nothing worse than trying to rush a shot or trying to squeeze an arrow through a group of branches, which results in the arrow getting deflected 90 degrees, or even worse, it deflects and you make a horrible shot on the deer. So just to summarize it, deer make people crazy sometimes, but just try to make the most ethical shot possible. I get it. You get an absolute adrenaline dump after you connect with the deer, and all you want to do is hoot and holler and then call your buddies. The two biggest lessons I've learned is things happen very quickly after you release an arrow, and your memory isn't as good as you think it is. So the best thing you can do is watch him until he runs out of sight and try to remember where exactly you last seen him at. So whether that be a big oak tree amongst all the pines or a rock that looks like Abraham Lincoln's head, just try to recall where exactly you last seen that buck. That way, if you don't have any of that lovely tracking juice right where the arrow connected with the deer, you can at least go back to where you last seen them and hope you see a little bit of blood there. Basically, just try to identify some sort of landmark that will help you once you actually reach the ground and begin your blood trailing. We've come to find out that once you're on the ground, things can kind of look a little different, and it'd be super easy to get mixed up and turned around, which would be a horrible thing, especially when it comes to looking for that deer. Another thing I would say is be listening for that deer as well. So even if it runs out of sight where you can't see it, sometimes you can still hear it crashing through stuff. Sometimes it just runs off into the oblivion and you're not able to hear anything. But that's just something to be aware of. Also, be sure to wait the respectable amount of time before you actually go and track that deer. If the deer is dead now, more than likely it's going to be dead later. Obviously, every situation is different, so take everything I said with a grain of salt. And when you do further research, maybe in one of these topics, just keep in mind that something that works for us might not work in your area, and then vice versa. And the last and probably most important thing I will say in this video would be that as hunters, I feel like we all want to kill that big deer. We all want to get our name in that record book, whether that be Pope and Young or Boone and Crockett. You see, we do all this prepping, whether that be stand prep, gear prep, we shoot our bows, you know, we try to learn as much as we can about deer and we try to pattern them. But in all seriousness, we're kind of doing the wrong prep work, if that makes sense. We're focused on the wrong book. Instead of the Pope and Young or the Boone and Crockett, I think we should be focusing on the good book, the book of life, and start trying to focus more of our efforts into doing the prep work that actually matters. So we're going to end this video just like we do with all of our podcasts by saying like, subscribe. Thank you guys so much, and Jesus loves you.